it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Galatians were legalistic and they were stuck in the law, is in a mechanical kind of way.
I think so.
Okay, so it makes sense.
And I think they were wrestling with, and I alluded to this in the lesson. I think they were really wrestling with, how do I tame the beast? How do I gain control over my life? And they've been turning to the law and to circumcision as a means by which to get assurance of their salvation, to feel okay. And they're trying to do it by rules in the law instead of leaning more radically and more boldly into the finished work of Christ on the cross for them and the presence of Christ through the Holy Spirit in their lives to enable them to live boldly, freely, and as forgiven sons and daughters. But I interrupted.
No, what I was thinking is, in order to do that, to live in light of this new creation that Paul is calling the Galatians to, that it would take great faith. I'm just curious how the Holy Spirit plays into that. Like, can you help me make the connection between this faith that Paul is essentially asking them to get away from this legalistic bent to begin to live in boldness, and how does the Holy Spirit...
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Paul is going to articulate this more straightforwardly in 1 Corinthians 15. And there he talks about how the second man, or the last Adam, Christ, has become life-giving spirit. And that's a condensed way of talking about a transition in Jesus' own ministry to his church. Mm. On the earth, he ministered, in bodily form, and was confined to one place at a time. And he talks about this in his final discourse in John's Gospel. He tells them, "Don't be sad because I'm going away. I'm going away so that you can do greater things than you've been able to do, because I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm going to send a paraclete. I'm going to send an advocate so that I can be not just beside you, but I can be in you." And then Peter talks about the way, Peter in his sermon in Jerusalem at Pentecost talks about how at his ascension, Jesus goes to the right hand of the Father and receives the Holy Spirit and then pours the Spirit out on the church. Well, for Paul, that is the Spirit of Christ that is on the earth. When the Holy Spirit gets poured out on the church, and then the Holy Spirit starts to dwell in us and make us new. The Holy Spirit isn't some entity apart from Christ. What the Holy Spirit has done is to come and bring the things of Christ to us, to use John's language. And the work of the Holy Spirit is to make us new and to make Christ alive in us. And so back to Galatians, Paul, his anxiety, his prayer, his desire for the Galatians is that, remember what he says in Galatians 4, that Christ be more perfectly formed in you. Well, what he's talking about is the Holy Spirit at work in us, making us new. And it's like he says, it's faith working through love. And that's the work of the Holy Spirit. And then we're called to live out the new creation. And that is, as those who are indwelled by the Holy Spirit, we are called to live in a world where the Holy Spirit is at work, bringing a measure of justice, bringing people to himself, folding them into the church, and then ruling and governing the church. That is Christ dwelling in the church. So the Holy Spirit has everything to do with it, because the Holy Spirit is the means by which and the way in which Christ himself is present to the church and working in the world.